Hello, my name is Brian Forsyth. I'm a library technician for the Charlotte County Libraries and History Division. Today we're here with Allyson Rae from NBC2 News, and we're going to discuss what the hurricane season is and what we need to know about it.
Absolutely. Thank you, Brian, for having me.
Well, thank you for coming.
So hurricane season, it's every summer, basically. It starts June 1st and goes all the way to November 30th. But I think one thing that's really important for people to know is that hurricane season, just because it's June 1st, doesn't automatically mean storms start firing up. It's really, climatologically speaking, that's when statistically most of the storms begin to develop, and they begin to fade away in November based on just the dynamics of the atmosphere and the temperature of the waters. But one thing that's really important, in the past 6 years, and most likely this year as well, each of the 6 past years, we've started hurricane season before June 1st. So there's an argument to say that maybe hurricane season now with this new climate normal should be maybe a little bit earlier on. But the message is that we just want people to be aware and ready and paying attention around June 1st, give or take a few weeks before things really start getting going.
Sounds like they're getting a little longer.
They're just starting a little bit earlier. And you know, the Pacific hurricane season starts, Eastern Pacific hurricane season starts May 15th. So having a storm in May is not uncommon. But what's interesting is storms that are a little bit earlier on in the season, they're typically not as strong. Sometimes they're subtropical storms, which means that they don't have all of the characteristics of a tropical system, but they're kind of there. They're a lot of times more lopsided, meaning the center of circulation is pretty far away from where the actual activity is, where the winds and the rain is. So the early season storms are interesting, especially for Florida. And one reason is that they tend to form a little bit closer to Florida just because the waters are warmer, we have better dynamics. It's during the peak of hurricane season where those big major hurricanes are coming from the Atlantic basin, from the west coast of Africa. But the early season storms and the late season storms a lot of times start to form right around Florida. So we have a higher chance of being impacted in some way. That doesn't mean we're going to have a Cat 5 knock on our door in May, but we could get a substantial amount of rain. And with these storms, and sometimes Tropical Storm Alberto, I think it was a subtropical storm, Alberto a couple years ago was a great example. We were nowhere near the cone of Alberto. It actually made landfall in the panhandle of Florida, but we ended up getting about 6 inches of rain in Southwest Florida. So the impacts can still be there even if you don't have a direct landfall. And that just goes on to a whole another topic of, you know, pay attention to each storm, even if it doesn't look like it's coming to you, based on the size of the storm, the structure of the storm, we could still have a major impact, even if it doesn't make landfall, or even if we're not in that cone. Hurricane Eta last year was another good example. We were not technically going to have the worst of the wind, but we still got flooding rains out towards some of our barrier islands.
Yeah, I think it's confusing sometimes between storm watch and storm warnings.
Right.
And knowing what to do.
Right. So a hurricane watch or a tropical storm watch, basically any type of watch versus warning, is pretty simple. So you think about a watch as the ingredients are ready. It's kind of like when you're baking and you get everything ready. You get the flour, you get the sugar, you get your eggs, and you set it on the table. Everything's there. And a watch is saying, hey, be ready to take action. Are you ready to put all those ingredients into a bowl and make the cake? Be ready. A hurricane watch is, are you ready to put up those hurricane shutters? Are you ready to stay at home, or are you ready to evacuate? What are you and your family doing? So a watch is, conditions are possible. A warning is, it's coming, it's imminent. You need to take action now, whether that's putting up those hurricane shutters. And actually, it's a pretty good idea to put up hurricane shutters when the watch happens anyway, just to give yourself a little bit extra time. But a warning is, hey, these strong winds, whatever the warning is for, whether it's a high wind warning, a hurricane warning, a storm surge warning, meaning these conditions are going to happen within the next 24 to 36 hours.
Yeah, well, that clears that up. How long does the hurricane season last?
So it lasts until November 30th. And one thing that's really important to know with the way that hurricane season works, even though we're starting in late May, early June, the peak of hurricane season doesn't occur until September. So sometimes Floridians or people that are new to Florida even, let their guard down because June goes by, July goes by, August goes by, and nothing's maybe happening just yet.
Yeah.
But hold on, like September and October can be so active, and those are when we get some of our stronger storms. The water has spent all summer long heating up. Now it has all the fuel that it needs. And this is when we could see the most amount of storms. This is kind of when you see the map of the satellite map, and there's 5 different storms around. It's typically late August, September, and even October in 2020. We had a very active October as well.
Could you give us just like a quick explanation of the different categories?
Right. So we have tropical depressions, which are going to be storms that have a wind speed less than 39 miles per hour. Then they get bumped up to tropical storm. And once the maximum sustained winds reach at least 74 miles per hour, we go into category 1 hurricane status. And that scale goes from 1 to 5. And once you reach a category 3, you're in major hurricane status. One thing that's important for Floridians, especially to pay attention to, is a lot of times we get hung up on the category and we say, oh, it's just a tropical storm, I know how to deal with that, or it's just a category 1. We never want people to ascertain their risk based on past experiences or a category. Each storm can be very different. We've had Tropical Storm Imelda happen just a few years ago. That's now a retired name because of the amount of rain it produced. And one thing that we've noticed, especially with a warming climate and warming temperatures, warming water, is that rain has always been, but is one of the biggest threats, dangers, and causes the most fatalities. So even if it's quote unquote just a tropical storm, we could still be looking at 30, 40 inches of rain. We could, and you have to take that into account to your hurricane plan. So I like to say, yes, there are, and you can find information about what level of storm is headed your way. But I really think at NBC2 we give a good job of saying, yeah, this is this type of storm, but here's what we can expect here in Southwest Florida. Even a Cat 5 going up the East Coast, what does that mean for us? So never get hung up on the category or what it is, but we do want you to pay attention to what the threats are, and that is the wind for your area, the rain, the storm surge, and especially here in Southwest Florida, storm surge, we can't tell people enough about the threat of storm surge. That's going to be the rise of water based on when the storm comes ashore, and especially during a high tide cycle and with elevated water levels, it can be very detrimental. And in Southwest Florida specifically, we're really susceptible to storm surge based on our bathymetry, based on what our shelf looks like under the water in the ocean. It's very shallow.
I actually live in a flood zone, and I was wondering if I would need to consider leaving sooner than later if we have something coming in just based on the fact that my home could flood.
Right, so people in flood zones are typically going to be in the evacuation zone that is first to leave. So evacuations are done based on the threat of water and storm surge and a couple of other things. But if you are in a flood zone, most likely you're in evacuation zone A or whatever that tier 1 equivalent is for your county. So when they make evacuations, they will say, you guys are under a mandatory evacuation. So if you are in a flood zone, you need to think about with you and your family more so than an area that's not in a flood zone of what your evacuation plan is. Where are you going to go? Are you going to bring, is the whole family going? You're all going to the same spot. Are you leaving town? Are you going to a neighbor's house? Are you going to a shelter? Are you going to a hotel? Are you bringing your pets? Hopefully you are. So you really need to have a plan in place. And especially if anyone in your home or family needs power, for any type of medical device, you really need to think about that as well. Maybe we don't have the worst floods. Maybe we don't have, the worst destruction in your neighborhood, but what if you're without power for 3 to 5 days? Your home might be intact, but does your family need power? And those are personal decisions that you need to think about when under an evacuation. Or are you under a voluntary evacuation? Maybe it makes sense for you and your family to evacuate regardless. So definitely think about those things.
Yeah, I think it was Irma that we were through. It's funny because I was here for Charlie, and living in Englewood, there was very little impact. But when I drove to work heading for Lee County, it was devastated.
Right.
It's amazing the difference of the impact of a storm depending on where you're located. It can be relatively close.
Right, and that kind of goes back to what I said, don't assess your risk based on past events. Hurricane Charlie was a very small storm. People in Naples think, what storm are you talking about?
Yeah.
You know, when you go up to Charlotte County and they're saying, hey, we got devastated up here. And then you think about Hurricane Irma, which is a large storm. So what if, you know, Hurricane Charlie moved 30 miles south and you would have been more impacted than other areas. So that's why we always say, don't think about last year or 10 years ago, think about what are the risks this year and what am I hearing the risk for my neighborhood could be, and think about what are you hearing the worst winds could be for your region, and prepare for those things and those winds. Because even though our hurricane forecasts have gotten so great in the past few years, substantially so, you know, just 30 years ago, we would be off hundreds of miles within just a few days. And now we've really narrowed that down. But still, those storms can take just a little jog east or west, and that can just make all the difference. Hurricane Irma example, you know, it made landfall on Marco Island. If it would have gone just 20 miles to the west, it would have been a completely different storm, and more areas would have been really devastated and had more destruction. The destruction was really kind of confined to the Keys and southern Collier County. Of course, we had damage everywhere, but imagine if it was a little bit to the west, totally different. And are you ready for that? Are you ready for that little jog? And that's what you need to prepare for.
Yeah, I hate to admit it, but I mean, I guess all of us can be guilty of it. If you're in an area long enough, there's times where you might become complacent, because if nothing's really, every year you get all the hoopla and whatnot, and then all of a sudden nothing happens, you're like, oh yeah, no, that's not gonna happen. Irma was kind of a wake-up call for me.
It is a wake-up call, and one thing to think is, you know, we've had so many new people move to Florida, as we do every year, and so a lot of people weren't here for Irma, and when those that were here for Irma may have not been here for Charlie. And don't think, and sometimes you see maps that say, oh, the average time that you get hit between a hurricane is 7 or 8 years. I want you to really think about Louisiana in 2020. They got hit by 3 storms, and 2 of them hit within 20 miles of each other. So 2 hurricanes hit within 20 miles of each other in the same year. So never say, oh, well, we got Irma, it's gonna be another 5-10 years before we have another one. You could have 2 hurricanes in the same year, and it just happened. So never, ever let your guard down.
Yeah, lightning can strike twice.
Absolutely.
Yeah, basically, yeah. Now they talk about like disaster supply kits. Is there like, if you were like to narrow it down, like these are the essentials you should have in the event that...
Tons of water. And I think my secret tip to water is people go out and hoard these gallons of waters. And of course, that's the easiest thing to do. What I do is you can find, you know, in camping supplies, you know, those jugs of water. They're reusable. I have collapsible ones. So I just, in my storage unit, have 3 to 5 of these 7-gallon collapsible jugs. I just fill them up, and that saves me from fighting over gallons of jugs elsewhere. One thing I think that, a couple of things that people don't think about to get is propane. You know, everyone's worried about gas, and rightfully so. You always want to have enough gas to get around. But if you're without power and you're looking for a meal, you can fire up that gas grill, and that can provide a great meal for you. Also, sometimes your generator can use propane if you have certain ones. One thing I really like, and especially in an event like what we had with Irma, without power for so long, is a battery-operated FM radio. And that's going to be important because we're going to stream, if we're in an event like Irma where, you know, we're full coverage for days and you need information, your power goes out. Your phone's going to run out of juice. Your computer's going to run out of juice. You're going to be, you know, somehow getting power intermittently through a generator or your neighbor's generator, if you have an FM radio, we'll still be streaming our news on multiple radio stations where you can get our information and you can find out where there's lost pets, where there's food, where there's emergency services, where there's medical service. So that can be a great thing. A couple other things that, one's kind of lighthearted, but maybe a comfort thing is instant coffee. Some people, they just wake up and they can get that instant coffee and it just makes the day a little bit better. Also, when you're picking up yard debris, think about having easy access to some yard gloves so it's easy to pick up things. Have some boots ready to go. And some of the more kind of hard to think about things is when you're bracing for a big impact. Do you have a bicycle helmet that you could just kind of plop on when the worst of the winds are coming through? You don't want anything falling or coming in the window that could hit you in the head. It's hard to think about because it's tragic to think, oh, here comes a strong wind, I gotta buckle down it. But it is safety, and if you have one, use it. And also another thing to grab is a whistle. If you're in a situation where there's rising water and you need to get people's attention, your phone is nowhere to be found, or you don't have power, a whistle or some sort of thing that you can alert people of, hey, if you hear, the medical teams coming by and looking for people and you can get their attention that way and you can't get out, that's a good thing to have too. Of course, gas and cash. People want to fill up their gas tanks. Cash is going to be huge when no power is out. Your credit card is basically going to be worthless. And also think about medications. Do you have all the medications you need for possibly the next 2 weeks? Because you don't know when that store is going to open. You don't know if they're going to have deliveries coming in. So try to make sure you have all that, and for your pets too.
Yeah, that's a lot of good information people wouldn't be thinking about. Now, they do have the information disaster guides. I mean, I know that the library carries them. I've seen them at supermarkets, Publix, so at least there's kind of like one-stop shopping for people to have that information.
Right, and there are tax holidays too. In the beginning of June, typically, they have those disaster-ready supplies that are tax-free, which is really important.
Yeah, I mean, for those that, have a little extra money to spend, I've even thought how nice it would be to have one of those huge electric generators, the ones that are almost like your air conditioning unit.
I'm glad you brought that up because generators, they can be really helpful, and the whole home, like standby units, are great. Of course, they come with a price tag, but it's like your house never lost power, and that's an investment you would have to make for your home. If you want to get the portable ones, those are great in a pinch too. One thing I really want to stress about portable generators is ever since I mentioned that deaths are most likely from some sort of water storm surge when it comes to hurricanes. But then there's the indirect deaths and fatalities that we've started to track from hurricanes. And we started giving storm surge warnings in 2017. And ever since we did that, the fatalities from storm surge have plummeted. But as we continue to prepare people for hurricane season, say this is how you can prepare, a generator is a great idea, people are buying generators, we've seen the amount of deaths from carbon monoxide poisoning increase because people are not using their generator properly. So when you have a portable generator, number one, do not use it inside your home. It needs to be in a well-ventilated area. If your area is flooded, then I'm sorry, you can't put it inside. You're going to get carbon monoxide poisoning. So read the instruction pamphlet thoroughly. Don't just toss it to the side. Actually read it. Make sure you're using it in a well-ventilated area outside in a dry scenario. One last thing that I would like to stress is that kind of going along with the people get hung up with categories. Because the categories only relate to wind and not the entire amount of threats. And as we've seen temperatures get warmer and waters get warmer, our storms aren't moving as fast. You have to remember that storms move because they're trying to transport energy to different parts of the globe based on temperature differences. And if you don't have a vast temperature difference, these storms aren't going to move as fast. They have no reason to. So our steering currents have slowed down, our storms have slowed down, and now we have a storm that can produce more water and hold more water because of warmer air. So we have slowing storms that have a lot more water. And maybe it's a category 2 or a category 1, but it has 50, 60 inches of water along with it. So please pay attention to all of the threats that are for your neighborhood and the potential threats for your neighborhood. There's the forecast and then there's the potential. Here's the forecast, but if the storm moves this way, this is what could potentially happen. And that wide range of possibilities is really important to understand when you're making your hurricane plan for your family. But I can't stress enough about the impact of water that we could have from these systems, and that's something we've noticed in a trend. And also we've noticed a trend of lately is storms tend to be intensifying rapidly more often lately, meaning that within just 24 hours, the wind speeds will kick up. We noticed that with Hurricane Michael. I went to go track that in the Panhandle a few years ago. It was category 3 when it was supposed to be forecast to hit land. And by the time it made landfall, it was a category 5. It rapidly intensified just before making landfall. So that's always going to be a possibility with stronger storms, not always those kind of weak, unorganized storms. If you have a well-organized major hurricane, the chances of it rapidly intensifying, it's going to be there. That potential's there. And you want to think about that as well.
Well, I think a lot of people, I know I'm guilty of it's a 2, it's a whatever. And now that you're saying that they are hanging over us longer and could drop a whole lot more rain and be a lot more devastating, I wouldn't really have thought of it.
Right, and you think about just water in general, we've seen so many flooding events lately that are outside of tropical systems, and tropical systems are just adding to that. And that doesn't mean every storm's gonna be like that.
Yeah.
Hurricane Dorian was devastating because it hung out on top of the Bahamas in one spot for 24 hours. And and then we had a couple of other storms that were a little bit more fast moving. There will be those fast moving storms that don't produce a lot of rain, that are more of a wind event. Every storm is different. And you just have to really pay attention to the threats for your area. And I also want to kind of comment on how active last year was and how more or less we kind of got away with an easy season in Southwest Florida. We had some flooding and we had a little bit of damage. But compared to the threat of 30 storms and what Louisiana went through and the Panhandle went through and what we had to deal with is remarkably different. So you have a season with 30 storms, and maybe we didn't have the most active season in Southwest Florida. Even historically, that was the most active season on record. Then you look at a year like 1992. That was Hurricane Andrew. We only had 7 storms that year, just 7. So, and then we have Hurricane Andrew come on through. The first storm, that wasn't until August, so it took so long for the season to actually get started. You have 7 storms. It's a strong El Nino year, which kind of takes away, which adds a lot of wind shear. Sometimes it's harder for those storms to form. And you have that one storm that just knocks everything out. So the outlooks, when we sit here and say, oh, it's going to be an active season, or maybe they're not going to have as many storms this year, that really doesn't matter. It matters where each one of those storms go. And we really want you to never let your guard down. If you don't see a lot of storms, it could be that one that's going to come right through our town.
Well, we all know how important it is to be prepared, especially now when we're looking at things building up and it's just becoming so much more.
Right. And you want to think about it, especially if you're at Home Depot doing a project and you see, a generator on sale. Maybe you think, maybe I should grab that while it's on sale before, we're in the cone and then it's the mad rush to Home Depot or Lowe's or to the hardware stores or to the grocery stores. Just kind of think about, and then it's not such a monetary endeavor when you kind of casually just grab a few things at a time and think about, how can I always have this kit ready to go? If it's time to get new windows in your house, maybe it's time to upgrade to the stronger hurricane-proof windows, and think about that.
Or worse yet, we're racing the stores to empty shelves because we waited too long.
Yeah, absolutely. Whenever I talk to people about hurricane season, my challenge for them is that when our news crews go out to cover the empty shelves, that I don't see you standing in line. Yeah, I don't want you in line. I want you to be at home, ready, prepared, already ready to go. And you're just there listening in a calm manner to what the next step is. Do I need to evacuate? Can I stay here and quote unquote hunker down and ride this out? And there's going to be different answers for each storm. You know, you might have to leave. You might be able to stay. You just got to know what the threats are for each storm.
Well, you've made me want to run out and get all my stuff right now.
See, I think I did my job then.
You did your job. Yes, you did. You can pick up hurricane guides at any of our Charlotte County libraries. You could also pick them up at Publix as well. We really want to thank you for taking the time and coming up here and informing us about our hurricane season.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. And always on NBC-2.com, we'll have anything you need to know about hurricane season, and we'll help you guide through each storm.
Okay, thanks again.
You're welcome.